A few days ago, a journalist asked De Laurentiis in the press conference, in this interview, you spoke about several problems with the coaches, the mayor, and the players. You also speak to us with too much arrogance. Why don't you come here as the president and representative of Napoli rather than as the owner of Napoli? Do you think the cause of Napoli's problems are down to your approach and your arrogant character? Yikes, man. That is a stinging question, and that's the sort of questions that De Laurentiis had to put up with voluntarily for 2 hours the other day. The answer to this question will be at the very end of the video, but don't skip all the way ahead. He talked a lot about other interesting things. We've got a whole chapter list below so you guys don't lose track. It won't be a translation of the conference that he did because he did it for 2 hours. It'd be way too long of a video, but it's more about getting little snippets of what he said and analyzing my interpretation about it. So let's get right into it, guys. So, firstly, they ask him, well, what's the point of this interview? Why now? And De Laurentiis says, some things can't be said as they happen. Basically, he mentioned in December that it's his fault for Napoli's situation, but he didn't go maybe too deep into the details of it, definitely not for 2 hours. He felt, I guess, that we were still in the middle of things happening, and he feels that maybe right now he can speak because we are in a better spot. And, maybe yes, that could be the case. Things are far from perfect, but at least there is some kind of stability. The mercato is closed, and Engonje has scored, so it seems like it's not been too bad. At least one of the players, the one that we spent the most money on, Lindstrom, is finally showing something. Kvara has gotten back to scoring ways since Verona. Osimhen has renewed since then. That means, at least for De Laurentiis, it guarantees him a big sum of money with that exit clause should a club come for Osimhen. So that chapter's closed. Mazzarri has dramatically improved the defense. We only conceded one goal against Inter when we were down to 10 men in the 90th minute, and one goal to Verona in the last 4 or 5 games. And everyone is finally starting to get back to full training, including Oliveira, Nathan, and all these guys. Plus, Anguissa and Osimhen are soon gonna come back from AFCON. Anguissa has even already come back since last week, and Osimhen is in the final. So, there is a bit more stability to Napoli than maybe 2 months ago, and that's why De Laurentiis feels that it might be the right time to discuss all these things. I think he's also a lot more free than maybe he was earlier. He mentions that Napoli will be making a movie about the Scudetto season, and it will be coming out in April. So I guess most of the work there is completed, and that means that he's got a bit more, time to now address the journalists. All right, moving on to the players, and he starts off with Kim. And firstly, he says we sold him for 50, not for 57 million as some media reported, but for 42 million. We knew he would leave because of this clause, but Giuntoli, oh, the clause is spelled badly there, but Giuntoli was on his way out to Juve since November, and so it was difficult to move early. For a good center back, you need to plan well in advance. And look, guys, I get it. It's a tough situation without a sporting director, and getting a good center back is a rare find. But surely that's only the case when you have a limited budget, right? We received 42 million for Kim. Yeah, it might not be 57, but don't try to downplay it. It's still 42 million euros. I'm pretty sure that can get you a long way, especially when you have a whole 3 months in the summer to do it. I don't care that Giuntoli left. You still had all of July and August as a minimum, plus obviously January in the winter transfer market. And, Dragusin to Spurs, that happened in the winter, and it's notoriously harder to get a center back in the winter, and yet Spurs was able to do it. And guess what? It happened for 31 million. So clearly within our budget. And you might be saying, or De Laurentiis might be saying, well, yeah, but Dragusin wanted to go to the Premier League. It's hard to attract good center backs to come to the Serie A. First off, that's not true. Center backs want to play in the Serie A. Even if they are in the Serie A already, they want to stay there because you can grow so much as a defender in the Serie A. You know that once you have that on your CV, then you become way more valuable because spending a few years here is worth a lot. It's known that Italy produces some of the best defenders. And it's not like we have trouble attracting center backs. First of all, Kim came last year, so that's proof that you can attract someone good. And then number two, Pavard to Inter this summer, again, for 30, 31 million. So, he's coming from Bayern. It's not a small club. And yet Inter were able to pull that off with all the financial struggles that they have. So there is no excuse for us not being able to find someone with the 42 million that Kim gave us. Instead, we only spent 5 for Nathan, and the results are what they are. Unfortunately, he's injured, so we haven't been able to see too much of him. But even if he wasn't injured, I think not getting someone to replace Kim is a huge problem. Right, then he talks about Zieliński and he says, have you seen his form lately? I have a doubt. If you don't train hard or play hard, maybe you are worried about picking up an injury because you have not yet officially signed for Inter. I can't rely on you versus Barcelona if I have that doubt. And I can't reward a player who said, I want to stay in the summer and then does this. But I blame his agent, not him. Plus, I need to see if the clause for Traore is worth triggering. And guys, in this case, I agree with De Laurentiis for 3 different reasons. Number one, it's true. Zieliński's form isn't good lately, so why not see what Traore has to offer? He's definitely going to be way more motivated than Zieliński. Number two, even though, yes, you could evaluate Traore in the Serie A and keep the more reliable Zieliński for the Champions League, I mean, you need to evaluate Traore in the Champions League. You can't afford to just rely on Traore in the Serie A if you're going to have to decide whether to activate his clause or not. I mean, if he does well in a match against Monza, for example, it's not going to tell you much. But if he does well against Barcelona or against one of the bigger teams, should we advance, then that's going to tell you a lot more about Traore's potential. So yes, putting him in the Champions League squad is necessary to evaluate him. And then number three, we have a realistic chance of getting past Barcelona. And what happens if Napoli goes up against Inter? Well, in that case, Zieliński's not going to make it into the starting 11 or even feature in the match, just like in the Super Cup, because obviously there would be a conflict of interest. So it's a lost spot in your squad. You might as well have given this out to Traore. So I fully agree with De Laurentiis about not including Zieliński in the Champions League squad. Then De Laurentiis goes and talks about Kvara's contract, and he says, his clan told me not to worry, that Kvara is doing fine, and that we can discuss it at the end of the season. And guys, remember Kvara's agent had a lot to say about contracts and a lot of things a few weeks ago, including Osimhen, and he said that some of the top clubs are interested in signing Kvara, but he didn't put a timeline on it. He didn't say for this summer. He said they're interested in Kvara, and honestly, I think Kvara is not going to leave this summer, and nor does he want to leave this summer. But I do think that this quote proves that whilst Kvara does want to stay, it will depend on us getting Champions League football, and it also depends on which coach is going to come in. Because if it didn't depend on those things, then why not just sign now? But clearly, Kvara wants to see what kind of project Napoli has. I also think that with Osimhen probably leaving Napoli, Kvara knows that he has the chance to be the main poster boy for Napoli. I mean, he's already one of the biggest superstars, maybe even one of the biggest legends of Napoli. It sounds crazy to say, but yeah, you could put him in a top five or at least top 10 in terms of players that have that much skill and that much impact on Napoli. I mean, he won the Scudetto as a protagonist, as the MVP of Serie A, but he's always had to share that spotlight with Osimhen to some extent. With Osimhen leaving, this is his big opportunity to be the main star for Napoli. And if he could somehow get us a Scudetto without Osimhen, then there won't be a debate of, oh, who was more important in Napoli's history? Was it Kvara or was it Osimhen? It would definitely then have to be Kvara if he can give us, an extra trophy, especially a Scudetto. So there's an aspect of a potential to be a club legend to the point of Amsic, Mertens, and all that, and maybe even surpass these guys. And Kvara knows that, so that's why he might want to stay. Should we get Champions League football, and should we get a good coach where he feels that we can win? But at the same time, if he feels like we can't win, then he knows it's better to not sign a new contract. And yes, he's only on that 1 million a year, but he has so much time to recoup that and recover that money if he were to leave Napoli and go for a bigger club like Real Madrid, should Napoli not have a good project. So I think that's what that quote is saying. So, guys, it's super important. I think that we get Champions League football and that we get a good coach for next season. And speaking of coaches, De Laurentiis had this to say, firstly about Mazzarri. They ask him about, is he going to be the next coach or who will be the next coach? And he replies, the next coach? Well, you guys, soon Mazzarri will finally have the entire squad at his disposal, with players returning from injuries and AFCON ending. Let's let him work in peace. What will be, will be. We'll see in April. And guys, I really like this answer for a few reasons. I mean, look, guys, Mazzarri, unless he goes on a 10-game winning streak, I'm 99% sure De Laurentiis will not renew him. I mean, even if we get top four, I don't think Mazzarri will be renewed. He would have to do something really incredible, like go exactly unbeaten for 10 or 15 games. And that's not going to happen. So please don't panic. ADL knows that he's not gonna confirm Mazzarri, and plus he said it in the past that he's here because he needs a friend to help him out in this tough, turbulent time. But the problem is that if he openly admits that Mazzarri will leave at the end of the season, I think it might hurt the chemistry between the coach and the team. It might hurt the motivation to do well together. It would certainly, I think, bruise Mazzarri's ego because whilst he knows that he signed only for, at the time, 9 months to take him up until June. I think in him there's a bit of hope that he could potentially extend with Napoli, and that's the extra 10% of fire and motivation that he's putting into this job. If you tell him right now, listen, you're gone, when we're at such a crucial point of the season, you risk destabilizing the environment again. Do you guys remember what happened when De Laurentiis said that Garcia should be sacked, but then he didn't actually sack Garcia and he kept him on for another month? Yeah, it was a disaster. So it's better not to talk about your coach potentially leaving you if you don't strictly have to. And then the other thing that I really like about this quote is that he says, look, we'll see in April. So he puts a quite a reasonable, date on it. Nobody can argue that with him. And it means that for the next 2 months, there's no point asking him this question. So, it keeps everything cool for the next 2 months. And I'm sure that actually, guys, in the background, he's probably already working on getting a new manager in. And April is not when he will start seeing, but it's probably when he will start to confirm which manager is going to come in. Also, depending on where we are in the table, clearly. He also went and talked a little bit about the past, Spalletti and Garcia. I don't want to talk too much about those kind of things because we spoke all season about that, but let's go over Spalletti very quickly. He says, in his contract, we agreed that I had the right for another year. He could have also not agreed to it. And regarding the method, I sent the email to confirm him because that is the official channel. I did it right after the Champions League exit to Milan to show him support. Then he said he didn't want to coach anymore, so we agreed to that. But my mistake is that I didn't force Spalletti to stay. Now, we got to analyze a few aspects of this, a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time, but let's do it a little bit. Okay, so you guys know the story, right? People criticized De Laurentiis for Spalletti's departure, particularly in the way that he tried to confirm Spalletti, kind of legally forcing him to stay without first having some kind of conversation to, feel where Spalletti was at. And people said, it's a bit too cold and it really shows his lack of man management qualities. And I do 100% agree with that. And I think at the end of this quote, when he says, my mistake is that I didn't force Spalletti to stay, I compromised, I let him go in exchange for that 3 million clause where if he goes and coaches another club, then they got to pay us. And, the lawyers are still working on that because he went to Italy. But I think that just shows that he doesn't get it. He thinks that his mistake is that Spalletti should have been forced to stay and he didn't do that. No, that's not the mistake. You shouldn't have forced people to stay. You shouldn't force anybody to stay. What you should do is that you should make an environment where people want to stay. And that happens over the course of several months. So your mistake is not that you didn't force Spalletti to stay. Your mistake is that you didn't build an environment where Spalletti felt like he wanted to stay. Why is he not doing that? And so on the one hand, I like in this quote that he's recognizing that Spalletti had such a major impact on the Scudetto, clearly, because he wants him to stay. And a lot of people have accused De Laurentiis of, kicking Spalletti out. That's not true. Spalletti for De Laurentiis was always a good asset, and he didn't mind that Spalletti got all the credit. But I just wish that, he had built an environment where Spalletti felt like he wanted to stay. And probably, the clause that ADL activated didn't have any kind of, reward for Spalletti's accomplishments of having won the Scudetto. So yes, while, it's a good thing to show support after you leave the Champions League, to say, hey, look, don't worry about it, let's try again next year. At the same time, you've just legally binded this guy to a contract agreed 2 years ago, which probably didn't have any kind of prize money for winning the Scudetto or any kind of salary increase in case that were to happen. And that's probably what caused Spalletti to want to leave. And, De Laurentiis is just not recognizing that. But the timing of this is also super important. He says he did this 2 days after Milan's Champions League exit to, Napoli's Champions League exit to Milan. And I wonder if, that is super important, not just to show the support, but because maybe Spalletti was holding off speaking to other clubs or maybe even the Italian national team until all his major involvements with Napoli were over. Clearly, the title was done and dusted, but there was still a Champions League to play for. And maybe Spalletti was, not holding conversations with other clubs and the national team until, that would be resolved. As soon as Napoli exit the Champions League, De Laurentiis was like, if I don't lock him in now, he's going to go and speak to other clubs or the national team. And he probably already caught wind, especially of the Italian national team being interested in Spalletti. He seems to suggest that a few times. And I suggested it a few months ago as well. I said, no way Spalletti, makes his decision unless he's got something better lined up. He's not just going to go and, cultivate his land for God knows how long. Spalletti probably, already knew back in April that the Italian national team job was going to be up for grabs. So I think De Laurentiis, caught wind of this and wanted to lock him in. But again, this approach to do things all in a rush and, have people be legally binded instead of making an environment where they actually want to stay, that's the problem. So good for De Laurentiis to recognize Spalletti's importance, but not good enough on the approach. Then he does talk a little bit about Garcia, and look, guys, I hate talking about Garcia. It makes my blood boil, so I'm not even gonna put the quotes up. But basically, he didn't say anything new. He just said that he realized from the first day that he thought that maybe Garcia, was not the man for the job when he said he didn't see Spalletti's football, but that he had the right credentials coming into the job because he did well with Lyon and Marseille in Europe, Europa League finalist, Champions League semi-finalist. He did well for Roma. But, he totally ignored the last 4 years of Garcia's tenure at previous clubs. And he also talked about how firing our previous athletic coach in favor of Garcia's was a huge mistake. But those are things that we already know, we talked about. And again, I don't want to talk about Garcia, guys. Right. Now, he talks about the club's operations, in particular, the finances. And he says, I'm working on what we have to do so that by 2030, we have a club that economically can compete with the strongest in the world. Now, that sounds, very nice, but careful about these words because he's not saying that he wants a team that by 2030 can compete with the strongest in the world. No, he's not talking about the team. He's saying he wants a club that can economically compete. So he's talking about his vision, his 10-year vision, or whatever it be, 6-year vision, is that the club is financially strong, not that the team is strong on the field. Now, clearly, you could be financially strong by making a team that is good on the field and winning prizes and getting in the Champions League, and that's what makes you financially strong. So you could say that's a consequence, but it's correlated. It's not a cause. You could also be financially strong because you decide not to invest on any players, and then you just have all these reserves in your bank. So um, it's very important, I think, this quote, because it really shows his priority. His priority is the economics of it. Maybe because that's his way to get into the big boys table with Florentino Perez. I don't know. Maybe because he's lining up someone to buy Napoli and they're going to be looking at the finances of the club so that he gets a big exit payout. Even though I think that maybe, he's also interested more in selling Bari than Napoli and then having his son come over and take over Napoli. But still, I think long term, this just proves what his priorities are. And guys, I don't want to say that this is a bad priority, right? I mean, having financial strength is good. I don't want to start having to pull all sorts of levers like Barcelona is doing, or be in a huge debt like Inter, and you have to change your owner every 5 years. And plus, the Serie A would not let us off the hook with all the debt that Inter has. I mean, they would send us right back to Serie D like they did in 2004. So I'm not saying that financial stability is not important. But what I am saying is that when you are the president of Napoli, you should be talking about your 2030 vision as something inspiring. You should be saying, I want this team in 2030 to compete with the best and be the best in Italy, fight for the title, and to be in the top 8 in Europe. If you say that, that's going to inspire so many fans and get so many people, way more on board with you because you would have your goals and the fans' goals that align. But if you come out here and say in 2030, I want to be financially stable, I mean, that's something you should say to, your collaborators, your investors, that's not something that you should air out to the fans because the fans don't care. They don't feel inspired by being financially stable. So even though I agree that should be something you do, don't go out and state that that's your mission. I mean, and it goes back to the whole communication problem that De Laurentiis has. He's not an inspiring communicator. And he doesn't resonate with the people he's trying to communicate with, even though what he says is not, entirely wrong. Um, but anyways, let's move on to more of things that he said about his finances. He says other teams have 1 billion in debt, but they have friends in the media, and so they speak well about those clubs. Meanwhile, I'm closing the year with 80 million profit and 170 million in reserves. I don't keep these. Thankfully, I don't need them. And yet people complain about me. Maybe it's just jealousy.
Controversy, once again. Why is it always the case with you?
I don't know why. Maybe someone's don't like me, but because maybe I'm too good. I don't know why.
Guys, that reminded me of the Ronaldo, thing. It's like, oh, maybe I'm just too good, and that's why they're jealous. But yeah, he's always, out there causing controversy, always commenting about the financial situations of other clubs and saying, yeah, I don't pocket this money that Napoli makes. It's like, dude, like that's the bare minimum that you don't pocket this money. I mean, you should be investing it into the club because being the owner of Napoli is not like being the owner of your own little business. I mean, you represent something that goes beyond you. You have to act as a president and not just be the owner. And then, yeah, I mean, showing off all this money that he has, I mean, that's good, but are you going to actually do something with this money? There's no point in having all this money if it's just going to be sitting there. And you saying that you're not personally pocketing this money, well, it doesn't make me feel any better about this money just sitting there, right? So, is this money actually going to be sitting there, or is it going to be used for something like a stadium and training facility? We'll get to that later, because yeah, he talks about the projects that he has for Napoli and the other investments. And speaking of one of these, Bari, the second club that the De Laurentiis family has, and he says, they accuse me in Naples of not having a youth academy, but I have a second team where some good players came through. For example, Khedira, Folorunshu, who played against Verona last week, Caprile, who is the goalkeeper for Empoli on loan right now. These are players which Napoli owns. So, guys, this one was interesting. Let's focus from a Napoli perspective. From a Napoli perspective, I think he has half a point. Why half? Because on the one hand, I give credit to him that players from the age of 18 to 22 who are maybe not ready yet for being in Napoli's first team but are too good for the youth team or for Serie C, they can go to Bari. They have preferential treatment there. They can grow for 1 or 2 years in the Serie B, potentially in the Serie A, and then they can move on to Napoli. A bit like what these three players are doing. And, that is a very good thing that I guess not other teams just don't have in the Serie A. But Bari is not a youth academy. I mean, this is something you can do with players from 18 to 22. But what are you going to do with a 15-year-old? Just having Bari is not a solution for him because Bari also doesn't have the infrastructure of a youth academy like a team like Napoli deserves. Plus, I mean, we try to grow local talent, or I mean, that should be the objective, right? To grow local talent from Naples or at least the Campania region. There's so much talent out there. And good luck trying to convince these kids and their families to relocate to Bari. If these guys are going to be relocating somewhere, they might as well go to Empoli or Atalanta, who actually have a proper youth system. So why would I relocate to Bari? If I'm going to relocate, I might as well go in the north, where if things don't work out for me, then I'm actually in a better place to grow up technically in terms of, opportunities for my future, in terms of like a normal job. There's just way more employment in the north. And if things do work out for me as a footballer, well, I'm in a better youth system in places like Atalanta, for example. So the whole Bari thing doesn't solve the fact that we don't have a solution for our younger players. And also, it doesn't solve the issue long term, because what happens when you eventually have to sell Bari because you can't have two teams in the Serie A, and eventually the objective for Bari is to get to the Serie A. So you're gonna have to sell them, and then what? What can Napoli do at that point? So yeah, that's from a Napoli perspective. From a Bari perspective, they didn't take this quote well at all. The fans were furious because obviously they're being associated to a second club, almost a youth club for Napoli. And, they look at their stadium. I mean, it's magnificent. They're a huge club. They're one of the biggest cities in Italy. They are probably worthy of being top 10 in Serie A if, they can get their things sorted. And yeah, the fans were not happy, and the official owner of Bari, De Laurentiis' son, Luigi, had to go out and make a statement saying, my dad's comments don't reflect my views. I'm working in the best interest of Bari, and, I completely, do not agree with what my dad has said. And I mean, guys, social media people, started saying this clearly shows that even within the Napoli, the De Laurentiis family, there's friction and things are not, smooth even internally within the family. And even his son had to publicly distance himself from him. So, it's a civil war. And if even your own son doesn't defend you, then what does that say about you? But guys, I mean, Luigi here was forced into making his rebuttal because otherwise he would lose all credibility as a Bari president. So he was forced into it. But clearly, one thing is something that you say to the media, and one thing is what you probably feel deep down. And probably him and his dad are very aligned. They do both see Bari as the second club of the family, and they probably do see Bari as a training ground for Luigi to then go and take over Napoli when De Laurentiis, who is 74 years old, is gonna eventually step down. So, I mean, who knows, man? Maybe it's not a youth academy for the players, but it is for building presidents or owners. So yeah. Anyways, let's continue because he talks about some of the, purely Napoli related investments as well. And he says, I told the mayor of Naples, give me the concession for the stadium within 120 days, or I will build my own stadium elsewhere in Afragola. I just need the laws in this country to be less restrictive. And in 1.5 years, we'll leave our training center, and I want to buy 50 hectares to make a training center like Manchester City's with 12 pitches. Without me, this wouldn't happen. Now, guys, let's see if these deadlines, to what extent they are true. I mean, he's been saying that he wants to do this for the last 10, 15 years, and every time he mentions a new town. So it seems like he's on plan C or D or E at this point. And I wonder, is he actually serious about it this time? The difference compared to the other times is that now he's actually put in some kind of dates to these. He's saying, look, this is going to happen in 120 days. I'm going to have my answer. He's not saying, some fugazi numbers or 3 years or 4 years. Like 120 days is a very tangible amount of time where people in 4 months can come and ask him, hey, you said just 4 months ago this. It's not, oh, you said 4 years ago, because you could justify, oh yeah, but 4 years ago, so much has changed since then. But in 4 months, not that much can actually change. So him putting that kind of deadline probably means that he's serious, because otherwise, in 4 months, he has to face the music, and he has a lot of explaining to do. And I really hope, guys, that, the mayor of Naples and De Laurentiis can come to some agreement on a 99-year concession of the stadium, because Napoli deserves to play in Naples, in the city of Naples, not in Afragola. From a purely identity point of view, but also from a transport point of view, I mean, you can walk to this stadium from some neighborhoods in Naples, and it's well connected to all the others. Within, 15 minutes, everyone can kind of get to it. If you go to Afragola, it's more difficult. You can't really walk there. You have to take the train. It's it's just a lot more it's just a lot more out there, and it doesn't represent Napoli at all. This stadium that we already have has just so much history. It's so nice, and it's probably cheaper to renovate it than if you were to go on outright build a new stadium, or at least I think. So let's see to what extent these threats are real, and if they can come to some kind of agreement. And regarding the training centers, again, there he also put a very concrete timeline. He says, we can't stay there for more than a year and a half, so we have to go. And for this one, there's a lot less, I think, at stake, because here you only really have to make the players happy in terms of, don't go somewhere that's too far. But it's not like fans have to get to the facility, so you don't have to convince 60,000 people that this is a good spot. You just have to, convince your group of players, listen, let's go to this spot and let's train there. And probably being in a place that's further away from the people is probably better for them, because they have a bit more privacy and a bit more, just zen at that point. So yeah, there's a few different locations that he's looking into. Afragola, one of them, but also Bagnoli, Pozzuoli, all these kind of things. Let's see what he ends up doing. I mean, if he goes to Pozzuoli, though, I mean, that's a very populated part of the province of Naples. So actually, they'll be right in front of the fans. So that'd be interesting, and it's a great area, by the way. Anyways, he moves on, talks about other things, and then we finally get to this question of the journalist: is the problem of Napoli your approach and your arrogant character? And De Laurentiis says, I may be wrong, but I put my money into this club, and so clearly I will take an active role in it. For example, we decided to auto-produce our own shirts, and that was led by my own daughter and enabled through my personal relationship with Giorgio Armani. I took you in Europe all these years, even more than Juventus, and I did it without cheating. Football is changing. It is becoming a show, and I come from that showbiz industry, because obviously he is like a cinema mogul, let's say. So, guys, he didn't really give a clear yes or no answer in terms of like, is your arrogance the problem? But what he did say was like, guys, you're focusing on my character. Why don't you focus on everything else that I bring to the table? I put in the money, so I'm taking on the financial risk. I am the guy with the vision of, auto producing the shirts, and I'm putting my own daughter into it, and my own contacts have enabled this with Giorgio Armani. So I am able to pull all these different strings, and I have this grand vision for how to make Napoli's brand more appealing. And I'm actually giving you the sporting results that you guys deserve. I'm bringing you to Europe every single season. So, that's something that other clubs and other presidents can't say with the level of consistency that we have. And I did it without cheating, but that should go without saying. But I guess in Italy, I think it's something that is rare. So yeah, I guess fair enough that he includes it. And then he says, I come from a background of cinema, of showbiz, of entertainment, and that's where football is heading. So you want me to be steering this ship. So, guys, he gives genuine answers as to why he is a value add to Napoli. And I don't dispute that. I'm never of the opinion ADL out, because I see all these things that he brings to the table, and I feel you and I respect you for that. And I think you are a great person to have as the visionary in the club. But the journalist has a point. You could have all these great things going for you, but if your character is getting in the way, then you should realize that you either change your approach or step aside and let the day to day be led by someone else. Just like you let the day to day marketing operations and logistic operations be run by your daughter, You should let the sporting and media side of things be run by someone like a sporting director, and not just any sporting director who has no presence like Meluso. And I'm sorry for the guy, but he has no presence. Like, I don't know why I should be listening to him. Why don't you give that role to someone like Cannavaro, someone like Hamsik, someone like Mertens if he were to retire at the end of the season? Give it to someone that journalists like, that journalists appreciate, and the media like. They have connections in the media. The Cannavaro has a lot of friends up there as well. Don't make it this whole thing of, oh, but these guys have friends in the media and we don't. No, make friends in the media. Or putting guys yourself that has friends in the media, play the game, play the system. And if you have someone there that the fans know for a fact that they can trust, that they can connect with, that have these are people that know how to communicate to us, and they're not going to be speaking to us about the 2030 vision being all about finances, but they're going to be talking to us about the sporting project, then I think Napoli as a club will benefit from that, because you will be the guy behind the scenes with the vision, making the sort of overall big picture decisions, and that's fine. You've done a good job there, but then you have someone else be the face of the club and interacting with the coach, with the players, with the media, with the fans. And I think that's what Napoli needs. And De Laurentiis, I think, did well here to emphasize all the good things that he's done and that he brings to the table, but he needs to deeply reflect on that question that journalist posed him and ask himself, should I be at the forefront of people relationships? And I think the answer should be no. But let's see if that approach will change. Unfortunately, I don't think that will be the case. Anyways, guys, thank you for staying all the way to the end of the video. I hope you guys liked it. Guys, smash that button if you enjoyed this video. I put a lot of work into translating 2 hours of content that De Laurentiis had, the actual full-on interview, then grouping it into snippets and analyzing it and all that. So I would have really appreciated if you smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you guys later for the match against Milan. Ciao, and Forza Napoli sempre.